All right. Well, our next guest speaker today will be Dr. Jennifer Curtin. She's the Chief Medical Officer of Rhythm, spelled RTHM, and physician who's been treating patients with complex, poorly understood illnesses since long before the pandemic. So thank you so much, Dr. Curtin, for joining us today. I'm so appreciative that you're spending your time and sharing your wisdom with us.
Of course, happy to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Of course. Um, well, I would love for you to briefly introduce yourself to the audience, maybe mentioning where you're from, and what led you to become a physician.
Yeah, so I guess I'm born and raised in California, and I was born in NorCal, ended up growing up in Southern California, and then ultimately making my way back to the Bay Area. And what prompted me to become a clinician, I actually, so initially I wanted to do research. And as I was working in research, that really wanted to do research that translated over into things that could help people with illnesses. And so I was doing research, and then I remember we presented this research that we'd worked so hard on, and the surgeon in the audience was like, I mean, that's cool and all, but I really need to know this, so I know if I put my stitches through this material, it won't just rip. And it was like, oh, wow, all that work. And we just didn't really think about the clinical, how it would really be used clinically. And so I realized, if I really want stuff to be able to translate from bench to bedside, I really need the clinical piece. And also I ended up developing some health conditions, as did my family, that really no one could figure out. And so it kind of also became a mission to figure out what's going on with me and my family. Is there a solution to this?
Yeah. Well, I will say that there are a lot of people that I know, and I'm sure you as well, that have, personal experiences that kind of lead them down the career path that they choose. And I think, especially in medicine, a lot of clinicians and also people doing research are motivated because of, things that they've been personally touched by. So once you went to medical school, did you already kind of have a track in mind for what kind of physician you wanted to be and what you wanted to specialize in?
So, I mean, originally I was very interested actually in surgery, but I realized, I didn't know that I had dysautonomia at the time. And so my dysautonomia really, as I look back, because I wasn't diagnosed for quite a while, was probably orthostatic hypotension, just knowing how low my blood pressure was just when I was standing and things. And so I realized I couldn't stand long enough to be a surgeon. I would get too dizzy. I'd have to be able to move around, put my feet up, and things like that. So I ended up going towards internal medicine because I really liked the problem solving aspect of it, and you see a variety of things, and it's kind of like you can kind of approach almost anything with that background. So I
Yeah.
did medicine.
So thank you for opening up about your own experience. How was navigating medical school with the physical and health challenges you were experiencing?
It was definitely challenging. I think, it was the first. I think it was the first year they had changed things to more of like a pass fail system, and the classes were not necessarily mandatory to attend, which is actually one of the key reasons I chose that particular school. And because I had to be able to lie down so often. And during flare ups and things, I needed to be able to lie down. I couldn't make it to class. And so I was able to kind of like study on my own, watch recordings. And the cool thing was just having that system allowed us to help each other a lot more. Instead of being each other's competition, we were actually each other's help. And it was really great. So, it was tough trying to learn to cope with those things, and, finding different pairs of compression pants and salt and water loading, but then trying not to swell up into a balloon. And, it was kind of it was an interesting balance there. But definitely the ability to be able to do classes from different locations, be able to lie down, and was was very helpful.
Yeah. I think one of the like major benefits we've also seen from the pandemic is the increased accessibility of medical education and allowing students to do so much work remotely. In addition to the private sector too, which we will touch on later, and everything that you are tackling now. But I've been very appreciative of that as well, because, sitting in a classroom for at least 8 hours during the day is not necessarily the best way for me to be spending my time, at least because of the consequences. So
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, it's hard for anyone, right? It's just not healthy to sit that long without being able to get up and move around. But yeah, it's not a great way, especially if you have dysautonomia or your blood pools or you have issues with fatigue and things like that. It's brutal. And so, yeah, I mean, they were just starting to roll out some initial kind of recording technology back when I was in med school. So, now it's a lot better, but then there's always the question of, well, we still want people there versus not there.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I agree. I think one of the big things that I was really kind of wanting to see was that medical education became a lot more able to support people with different kinds of health conditions, because I think it really does bring a different lens when you're a provider who's actually been sick, and you've gone through your own challenges. You can empathize a lot more with what your patients are going through. You can understand why people act a certain way or respond a certain way when you say things. It's just a different kind of approach and mindset when you go through it.
yeah,
But it's really challenging to go through it. So it's sort of that, well, okay, if it's that hard, how many people with health conditions are even going to be able to make it through? So, you know, that's a tough thing to solve. But I do think the telehealth component has made things easier for people,
yeah,
but not just easy in an absolute sense.
yeah. I know it would, and it's my dream to see more people in different, positions of health be able to be a provider because of the experience that they bring to the table. Um, and hopefully with time, there's going to be more adaptive ways to allow individuals to pursue what they want to pursue. Because I think that, the barrier to entry is really great. But you were at the forefront of medical education beginning to be a little bit more accessible. But did you receive any pushback from either students or faculty or anybody that you encountered because of the health challenges you were managing?
Not really, because a fair amount of my class took advantage of the ability to not necessarily have to attend class and the ability to study on your own. And generally speaking, I think because people were supportive, my class and stuff kind of, especially like my housemates and things, like they actually were just like, hey, like, are you okay? Like they were more concerned and like trying to, be supportive of me and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
um, rather than necessarily there being any bad consequences. But it was more so when I started interviewing for residency programs that because I did have a condition that I ended up getting diagnosed in medical school. And, I wrote about that a little bit in my residency application. And at one program that was very small but fairly prestigious, I got pulled aside by the head of the program on
Wow.
my interview day. And basically they were like, kind of grilling me on my health and saying, are you sure you're going to be able to not take like kind of extra days off? And I'm like, I didn't think part-time residency was even a thing. And they were like, well, it's not. And that's why. And I was like, if you were so concerned about me, why even invite me out for an interview, like that sort of thing. So it was just, there were encounters and I had to explain my health stuff and really, you find ways of explaining it and talking about, well, hey, I'm on this medication now where I get, IVIG infused. So I actually have the collective immunity of 10,000 people. It's actually like a superpower. So, things like that. So you get creative about turning something that people may perceive as a weakness into a strength.
Yeah.
And, but it's tough. Like when you're having to deal with that. It wasn't the majority by and large of places that I had gone to and interviewed at that I got kind of grilled on my health stuff, but it did happen. And when it did, it was it was a little disturbing and challenging, but
Yeah.
it's kind of unfortunately comes with the territory.
Yeah. Do you feel like that was influential in like how you ranked your residency like applications? Like how, the culture or the people that you interacted with at certain places, did that influence like how highly you ranked different institutions?
Just some degree, yes, because I was just like, I don't want to go to a program where they're going to be really um, constantly scrutinizing me and
Yeah.
things like that. Just you're going to be under an extra load of pressure to perform, and every little thing you do is going to be attributed to, oh, you have this, and that's why this happened, right? Even if other people did the same thing or had the same thing happen to them. And so, yeah, definitely, I think it did influence my rankings. But at the same time, I mean, I also understood to some degree where they were coming from, where they're maybe a very small program, very limited number of residents, where if, let's say, you are out for longer periods of time, the other residents have to pick up your shifts.
Yeah.
And so I kind of get that. And I was like, so it was balanced in the sense of like, okay, this is not a great experience for me, but I'm also like, I understand where they're coming from. They're kind of trying to protect the other people in the class. And I'm like, I understand that. And so it was sort of like taken with a dose of realism and just like, all right, maybe is this the best program for me to apply to? Yeah, maybe not. So
Yeah. And once you were in residency and, a officially an internal medicine physician, how did you end up taking care of patients with complex, like poorly understood illnesses?
I mean, I guess I really wanted to work for the doctor who had originally treated me and who'd gotten me kind of well enough to at least get through medical school and residency. And they didn't typically take people right out of residency. And so I didn't think I was going to get that job, but I ended up getting it. And
Wow.
so, yeah, so I ended up just diving right in, and that was the type of patient that they saw. And so I really kind of got to work with the complex chronic illness patients, the sort of mystery cases, and I really got to work with them, starting 3 months out from when I graduated. I did some locums work in between just because I had 3 months to kill, and I was like, all right, making some money would be nice.
Yeah.
And that was definitely an experience. Goodness gracious, was it? But it was one that was very eye-opening in terms of what things can get like in certain hospitals, especially smaller hospitals that are understaffed. Yeah, I think I worked 60 hours straight with 30 minutes of sleep at one point, and that was pretty brutal.
Yeah.
I had post-exertional malaise for about like 2 weeks after that. But I'm laughing now, but it was not good then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Luckily some of those laws have changed a little bit. But they still definitely push the boundaries of what's healthy for sure, especially now that we know like how important sleep is and the problems that arise when you have a lack of it. So yeah, medicine still has, some improving to do in terms of you know, how they structure the workflow. So
yes.
and you dove right into treating patients at a clinic that you were once a patient at, and maybe still a patient at, I'm not sure, but how do you think that your personal experience with, these illnesses, can you share some examples of how they impacted your patient care and your perspective on the patient care?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, honestly, as tough as it is to be kind of like on walking both sides of that fence, it really does give you. I was getting worked up for things my entire medical school and my entire residency. So I was walking through the tract as both a provider and a patient.
Mm.
And so sometimes, it just gives you that different perspective where, we'd be doing setting up patients and consenting them for procedures. And I'm like, I've actually had this done myself. This is what it feels like. And, this is the experience and blah, blah, blah. And so you're able to kind of explain to people in a more, personalized way of just like, hey, I went through this too. And, it sounds really scary. It's actually not that bad. Here's what it's going to be like. Here's the scariest part, this kind of stuff. And people really kind of respond to that. And I think, treating the patients with a complex illness, I'm like, yeah, I know what it's like to be in your shoes. I'm still in them. I'm still working through this. It's a journey and I'm going to walk with you in it. Like it's a team effort. And, if you bring something to me that you found that's exciting and you want to look into, I'll look at it. I'll read it. This is basically, this is an investigation and something that I'm learning, you're learning, we're going to do this together. And so going through my own journey, I was also able to, it kind of sounds weird, but almost like test a lot of things on myself and see kind of like what was working for me, knowing full well that not everything that's going to impact me is going to be the right fit for somebody else. But it does allow you to also figure out, hey, is this imaging order written correctly? I'm going to go, I have to get it done anyway for myself. Let's make sure that there were no kinks or anything before I go and then send somebody with say more limited energy to go get that same scan and then have it be done wrong and et cetera. So, it really kind of pushes you in a different way to explore and connect with people and say, hey, you know what, this new theory, let me dive into that and rabbit hole into that and figure out, hey, could this apply here? Should I be looking for this? How do I test for it? It keeps that that kind of investigative curiosity going really strongly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's as a like truly curious person, I'm sure that it's also like fun for you in a way and motivating. There's gonna be, things that we're always gonna be needing to learn to help this patient population, but your patients, I'm sure, like it's a very unique experience to have a physician that, is willing to accept recommendations on research articles and, testing things out. And so I think this is like the perfect transition to talking about rhythm and the philosophy there. I have so many questions about this, but we can first start with like, how did rhythm come to be? And like the philosophy behind, starting this company.
Yeah, so rhythm really, I was, one of the things treating this patient population and going through these illnesses myself was the ability to try and figure out, okay, what works for whom? What treatments work for whom? We know that there are treatments that can help people, but there are so many treatments to choose from actually across the spectrum of things like, dysautonomia, ME/CFS, mast cell disorders, also like connective tissue disorders, lipedema, so many things that overlap. And it was really tough as a practitioner sitting there going, okay, I actually have a lot of things I can choose from, but what do I choose for this particular person sitting in front of me that's going to give them the highest likelihood of benefit and the least likelihood of side effects? And the tough part was, and I asked other providers who'd been doing this longer than I had, were you able to ever really kind of develop an intuition or a sense when someone joined your practice and was sitting in front of you that they would be a responder to a particular treatment? And all of them by and large said no. In other areas of medicine, you kind of start to develop a little bit of a sense, but not here. And that was something where I said, this is where, basically having a computer do some of the analysis here would really augment and help humans, because it's hard to think of so many possible combinations and look at all of the tiny factors that may have made a treatment or combination of treatments really be the life-changing thing for a particular person, but then not work at all for someone else with almost the exact same symptom profile. And so it was like, I really, really, really wanted to understand better what are the underlying factors, because we know the pathophysiology does overlap. So there must be some connection and some pattern there physiologically, and we just haven't discovered it, and it's a pattern that's too complex for a human to understand. So can we get computers to help us? And with more and more people having smartphones, wearable devices, being able to do things remotely, and with the advent of just, better and better app technology and things like that, could we collect the data we needed to really understand, like throughout someone's treatment, and start to really know why certain treatments were working the best for some people and not others? So we could get people to that best possible combo for them without having to cycle through and try and fail like so many treatments before they got there. And that was one of the big things that drove kind of like going towards rhythm, but also the pandemic. A lot of these conditions get triggered by an infection as their original onset. That's true for a good chunk of cases, almost like 80% of cases with ME/CFS, sometimes up to like 40 to 50% of cases for dysautonomia pause. And when the pandemic hit, it was just, everyone in this kind of community who understands that a lot of these things come out after infections are just really worried about what's going to happen when so many people now develop these conditions, maybe for the first time. And already it's hard to get a diagnosis for some of these. It's hard to find someone who can treat you, even before the pandemic. So I really wanted to be able to expand and scale that kind of care, but to really build in that aspect of how can we just make the care better overall by learning from the data, collecting that data well, so that we can actually expand the knowledge, scale the clinicians, train more of them, train them well, and then use that data to really get some good, solid answers about why things help some people and not others.
Yeah.
So that's really kind of where it came from.
Yeah, and it's the investment on the front end, making sure that you're trying to get the right information and the right volume of information. And it's, people that are in this business are in it for the long haul. And I think that we are getting closer and closer to answers that will help us move forward. But we appreciate all of the practitioners that are in this space, because I know that it's a really challenging one. And it's not for the faint of heart. And I would love to hear about how you and maybe the other practitioners at Rhythm try to balance the philosophy of seeking the underlying cause of the illnesses, but then also needing to provide timely treatment to suffering patients, especially when this complete understanding is a little bit lacking.
Yeah, it's a tough line to walk, and it's something you kind of learn with experience and with treating patients. And one of the things we do also is, so we had all of our providers did a training that I designed with the help of another clinician and input of some researchers and patients and things. And so each of them has done, north of probably 200 hours of training specifically in these areas. And we also meet every single week for at least 4 hours throughout the week, and we all help each other. And so we're also all constantly learning from each other, the cases, the patients, and realistically, it's something that we all give each other feedback on. And so, for me, kind of, it's very easy as when you're really have a research kind of mindset or background to want to dig into just what's the root cause, what's the root cause, treat that. Sometimes the tests to get at the root cause don't exist yet, or they're really hard to access. And so one of the things we do is we're constantly staying on top of what tests are there. We actually have a clinical lab where we're trying to develop some of the ones that don't exist yet or that aren't accessible. So it's like, if it's not there, make it. And that's a much, that statement sounds very short, and there's so much work and investment and time that goes into that. But it's like, finding people with a similar passion, working together on solving this is so important. But the other piece of it too is that I think really it's just voice over. When we see one person starting to really dive deeply and the patient they're treating has a lot of like active symptoms, we all chime in and we're like, hey, have you thought about doing this? This is something that's just like a quick, easy hack that they can do. It's low lift, it's cheap, but it can make a big difference. And so we all kind of keep each other in check there. We have a shared resources file that's got like kind of whenever we find something that's helping, we write it down and we have it indexed so that anyone can reference it for future patients. And we record our sessions in terms of like what we discuss, so that there's teaching tools and stuff later. So, but really, it's having a realistic sense of how long is it going to take to get to that testing. How much stress is that going to put on the patient to get it done? Is it really going to give you a clear answer, or is it going to give you more questions? And so if it's like, hey, if it's kind of muddy, the waters all the way through, you should start doing these small things incrementally while you're doing that. So I kind of see it as two parallel paths that you're following. And it's always making sure that you just don't get too rabbit holed into just finding the mechanism, because you could go down that road for the rest of your life and maybe not solve all this. So it's okay, pepper in the key lifestyle hacks and changes and little tips and tricks and certain medications that more so target symptoms, and make sure those are threaded into this longer road of working up the underlying cause. So it's kind of a weave.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you kind of have the test to be able to figure out what has caused it or what the mechanism is, if we don't know the treatment yet either, that's like another missing piece of the puzzle. So working with, with what you've got, but then also doing your best to create some new avenues. So it's really cool to see the innovative nature of Rhythm. And you are the chief medical officer, and I would love to hear about your role, how you would describe your role, and then kind of what your day-to-day looks like.
So yeah, I mean, chief medical officer, it's basically I kind of oversee the entire clinic side. I also do work with our tech team, our product team, our data team, and our lab team. So I'm also a co-founder. So, I kind of, and when you're a smaller kind of earlier startup company, really you wear multiple hats. So you have a title, quote unquote, but you really are kind of doing some of everything. And so, my day to day, I am on a lot of meetings, which can get a little painful, but really it's making sure that the company vision stays clear and that we're moving in the right direction. You have to balance that with basically what's going on in terms of like finances. The ability to raise funds has changed a lot in the past several years. How do we make sure that our patients, the clinic is running smoothly, our patients are getting what they need, we're still expanding to additional locations, our providers are getting the help they need, our care navigators are getting the help they need, all the way down to making the intake forms better for our EHR onboarding for new patients. Like, I'm in there making them. So it's kind of all the way from making the forms to supervising other people, to working with folks, to connecting and networking. It really spans the gamut, to be honest. So I wouldn't necessarily say that my role is a traditional CMO role, because it's really more so a startup co-founder role.
Yeah. With the immense experience that's needed of a CMO.
Yeah, and I do see patients as well. So it's kind of, my patient panel is smaller, but what I do is and in the discussions, we do case presentations every single week. So I'm always there for those. And so I'm able to help give feedback and things and advice on basically patient cases from any of our providers. And also I can, run some of when I'm stuck on a case, like run it by them and get feedback. And it's just, that is such a powerful aspect of care, is having that kind of like group rounds ability to crack something as a team.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like something that doesn't exist a lot of places, especially for this patient population in particular. Before you came on, we actually had Dr. Peter Rowe speak and talk about his reflections from the National Academy's towards a common research agenda post-viral illnesses conference. And he was basically saying like a major takeaway was all these people are working in different silos and really just need to be like communicating with each other, because we're going to be so much more effective if we're working together on things instead of trying to address similar questions in parallel, instead of like working as one, you know, cooperative unit. So I can imagine that having that group of providers and having, you know, meeting of the minds every week for that long is super, super helpful in being able to advance care a lot quicker.
It is. And, you know, there are things that like, you know, we can't necessarily do. We don't have the equipment to do or the technology or whatnot. And so it's really also reaching out and just not being afraid to just call people and set or email them and go to conference and just walk up and say hi and form relationships with folks and start to really understand, hey, this person is amazing at this thing. This person can do this. And then you also start to realize, ooh, this person, this would be so cool if they could do this project with this person. They've got technology that overlaps. And if you could connect these two folks and they could do this, maybe there'd be a non-invasive way to be able to do X, Y, or Z that would then be way more accessible to people. And so you really, that part of it is also exciting and fun, the connecting, the networking. And that part, I feel like, as much as it is easier to jump on like a Zoom call or something to connect with people around the country, it also is a little bit different networking in person. And so, you know, there's a conference coming up that I'll be going to in person, and I'm actually like really excited about it. Obviously, going to be masking the entire time, but it will be exciting to meet people that I've been connecting with and talking to and even working with pretty extensively, and meeting them in person for the first time. And it's just like, you know, that kind of excitement and that sort of human connection, I think, is going to be powerful. And the people who set up the conference were basically saying, yeah, we really want to bring people together into the same room to just get us all together, researchers, clinical, everyone who's working on this problem, and just have us all meet each other, and really, so we're not duplicating efforts and we can really get on the same page and start to make that like magic really happen.
Yeah, that's so exciting. You know, obviously Rhythm is tackling some issues that healthcare and the system has inherently, but looking at the broader healthcare landscape, what systemic changes do you think are necessary in order to better support patients with poorly understood illnesses, given the fact that, you know, access is obviously a challenge, but then also like encouraging these insights among healthcare professionals, like you just mentioned with these conferences?
Yeah, so I think, you know, one big one is just medical education. And I think the earlier you can get that medical education on these kinds of conditions, so like in medical school, in residency, ideally med school, that it just kind of hits you differently. The earlier you can get it in, when you're not distracted by 8,000 things you have to do that day and, you know, alarm bells going off and all this. But it's, I think that's going to be really powerful just in terms of getting it in early, the information, so people are familiar with it, and then that way they'll recognize it and they'll see it and treat it. And the other thing is making medical education more accessible to people with these conditions, and making them feel comfortable enough to be able to speak about what they're suffering with without fear of repercussion. Because one of the biggest things for me that helped things stick in my head was learning about conditions that my colleagues and classmates had. It stuck in my head so much more powerfully than even things I read, right? It just, we are geared towards human stories. Like, that's just, as a species, how we've communicated for millennia. And so it sticks better when you got an example, and one that you're close to and you know well. So having that, I think, is going to be powerful as well. I know those are tough things to do. Those are big lifts. But the other components would be things like having more just readily accessible CME. And the tough thing is, when you're a provider, right, there's so many things you can do your CME on, your continuing medical education. And it's almost like there would need to be some kind of requirement from higher ups, like from your organization, from your employer, from the state, from whatever, to include these kind of conditions as like you have to do at least 1 hour or 2 hours of mandatory CME on this topic every other year, something like that. So that way it forces clinicians to actually choose those CMEs from the thousands of CME choices you have.
Yeah.
Because there's so many things to stay on top of. How do you choose? And so, that's important. Obviously, conferences are very important as well, but conferences also can be expensive. You got to fly there. You got to take time off of, your work, and that means not seeing patients. And so it's like those are always going to be powerful modes, but having virtual access to conferences, I think, has made them a lot more accessible, and having the recordings available. So still being able to learn the material, even if you couldn't fly out to said city and spend a week there,
Yeah.
Yeah, so but also technology about data sharing, having collective analytical tools, having repositories that researchers and clinicians alike can start to access. And, something that we're working on as well. And I think, multiple groups are trying to build these kind of interfaces and apps and things that can track data throughout someone's care and make it visible to the providers. So that way the providers can actually see the fine-grained data of like, what's happening? We gave you this treatment. How are your symptoms actually responding to it? Because if you see somebody, let's say every 2 to 3 months for a visit, it's really hard to figure out what happened in that 2 to 3 months. You're relying on that person's memory, their recall, you're relying on, and you may not know what other confounding factors happen. So how much can we measure objectively without straining the person? Can it take less than 60 seconds to gather that information, less than 30 seconds to gather that information, and eventually no time at all, no active input at all? And can we get it to be accurate enough, organized enough? Because it's a lot of data too. How do you display that much data in a way that's useful, that someone can actually use? And so it takes a lot of design, working with patients, working with clinicians, trying to get everything together. But for me, I had patients even tracking that kind of stuff on paper for years, and it made a huge difference. So it's like, how do we apply that widely across everyone? So you can actually, really, really make decisions on better and better and better data.
Yeah. And something that hopefully the generation I'm in and generations to come are going to also be more accepting of integrating technology super easily into their day-to-day life and tracking health measures, and maybe even figuring these things out on their own before even going to a provider. There's no replacement for a doctor, but I think that they're, like, you guys are creating space for technology to just improve the quality of life of these patients that are managing these conditions. Because I don't think we're going to be preventing them anytime soon, but.
Oh yeah, and I remember, it used to be there's this whole kind of, I've seen that like the shift going through my career. Now, mind you, I'm kind of in a little bit of a niche area, but initially it was like, don't bring me things from Dr. Google. It's like wrong, and all that stuff. But now it's like a little bit more accepted, and now clinicians are even using Google if they can't figure something out. And now it's like, hey, I actually am getting like research papers from Twitter, or it's not called Twitter anymore, but X. But it's like, okay, great. People are becoming more accepting of it. They're understanding it more. People are using these devices themselves. And I think it's also powerful if you can go to a clinician and you can show them on your phone that your heart rate has, whenever you stood, it was shooting up 30 points because you were using this wearable device. And they're going, oh, whoa, that's really unusual. Let me look into this a little bit more. It really makes it real in a sense that they can actually see. And then the other component too is, let's say you started treatments and you're tracking your symptoms, and you've noticed that every time I happen to be on treatment X, which was really not geared towards any of these symptoms, it was helping them anyway. It's like, notice all of them went down repeatedly. This was something that happened multiple times. And it's like, interesting. Okay, let's look into this a little bit more. Like when you have that data, the clinician can be like, that's interesting and it's repeatable. Let me look into why this might be happening, or, maybe we can try prescribing that for you a little bit more often if it doesn't have major other side effects or interactions. So, and then that's how case reports gets done. And suddenly it's like, hey, this works for this, and then someone reads that and is like, I've got a similar patient. Let me try this. Let's see if it works. And then, oh, it worked for my patient too. But the ideal world would be one where you wouldn't have to rely on a case report randomly popping up in some journal that you may not be subscribed to. It'd be one where there's a central repository of all of this information, and you can just search for it and be like, okay, here's what's ever been used for this. Here's what's good. Here's something, who are my patients most similar to, and what's worked for them, and where do I start?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely something to dream about for the medical field. But I know that you and other groups are also not just dreaming about it, but working towards it, which I truly appreciate, and also so many other people that will undoubtedly benefit from that work. So I would love to know, because you're a wealth of knowledge, and we actually did get a question about it. Where can listeners, attendees, get more information about Rhythm?
So I'd say our website is Rhythm, and it's spelled RTHM. So M is Mary.com. And we actually launched our Rhythm community fairly recently, publicly, and it's got a lot of information, just general information on a lot of the conditions like POTS, dysautonomia, mast cell, long COVID, ME/CFS, resources on pacing, info for caregivers. We're really trying to kind of cover the gamut there. And so that if you go to our website and you hover over where it says join now, you'll get two options. You can either apply to be part of the clinic, or you can join the community. And so there are quite a few questions joining the community, because it's helping us actually gather data on like who's interested in joining it, what other content should we add to it. If we're noticing that a lot of caregivers are actually joining it, we'll start putting more caregiver related info in there. So you can definitely check that out. And that's where we've got a lot of info on our site. And yeah, so that's where I'd refer people.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody here would have a problem filling out a survey now that they know how important the data and the information is to help you guys and continue your work. So, and you've obviously spent a lot of time, doing your own homework and research. What other resources would you recommend to patients, caregivers, other physicians if they're interested in learning more? This is something that I am asking all the providers, because I think there will be some consistencies in their recommendations, but also some unique ones.
Yeah, so I'd say, depending on the condition that you're looking into, there are really amazing resources. So like Dysautonomia International has phenomenal resources. Also, Bateman Horn Center, they have a really great library of resources that span across from things like ME/CFS, long COVID. There's some dysautonomia resources there, some fibromyalgia. The Clinician Coalition website, US ME/CFS Clinician Coalition, there's a lot of resources geared towards both patients and providers. It's a little bit more so providers, but that is primarily around ME/CFS, but also there's info on some MCAS, like the overlapping conditions and how to look for those in both adults and kids. There's, also there, I mean, really, there's so many. I'd almost rather like put together a list perhaps and maybe like email it or something. So but those are some that are, a good start.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your personal experience and your wisdom with us. I am really excited to see, how Rhythm continues to change patient care for this population and for so many others. And I am just so grateful for your contributions and for all the work that you're doing and for the time that you've spent with us today.
Of course. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a great experience. And, just the people who were giving a talk before here, I actually kind of teared up during that one because it really brought back some some memories and things. And it just, my heart goes out to everyone with these conditions. It is not easy. And, just, sending you guys a lot of love and support. And, I know that we're working towards trying to find answers and things that can help. And yeah, I'll try to put together some resources and send them after to share.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be sharing information with the attendees after the conference is over. But yeah, I think as you put it, it brings back a lot of emotion, but is also a continuing source of motivation. I think, at least for me, and there's no replacement for personal experience. And I think that, these conditions are life-changing. And has provided me a new passion, and something that I never expected to pursue, but am now very I'm dedicated for life. So yeah, and thank you so much for being a source of inspiration to all of us as well, and all the work you're doing.
Well, thank you. And I'm just humbled and grateful to be able to try and give something back to this community. So.
Well, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your weekend.
All right, you too. Take care.
Take care. Bye.